I should have known something was wrong the moment she reached for my hand during the ceremony. Not because it was strange, we had known each other long enough that it wouldn't have been. But because of the way she did it. Not the casual, reflexive grab of someone looking for comfort. Slow, deliberate, like a decision being made in real time. Her fingers found mine between our chairs and held on. And I let them, and neither of us looked at each other. And the music kept playing, and my sister said her vows in a voice that kept breaking in the best possible way. And I sat there with Vera's hand in mine thinking this is either the beginning of something or the end of pretending it isn't already there. I still don't know which one it was. Maybe it was both at the same time. Maybe that's how it always works with the people who matter most. Let me take you back to before the wedding. Before the hand. Before the whisper that I'm still hearing, months later, in the quiet moments before sleep. Let me take you back to the beginning, which is the only place a story like this makes any sense. My name is Owen Calloway. I'm 33 years old and I teach high school history in a mid-sized city in Ohio that has exactly the right number of coffee shops and exactly the wrong number of reasons to stay up past midnight, which I do anyway because I've always been better at the night than the morning. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment that is 1 bedroom more than I need and 1 dog short of feeling like a home. I drive a car that is 11 years old and still hasn't forgiven me for a parking garage incident I don't discuss. I am, by most measures, a person whose life is going fine. Not remarkably. Not the kind of fine that makes for good stories at parties. Just the steady functional, quiet kind of fine that you build when you've decided that keeping your life simple is easier than keeping your heart open. Vera Solano has been my closest friend for 6 years. She is 31, works as a landscape architect for a firm that designs public parks and green spaces, and has the specific kind of laugh that makes whatever room she's in feel like it just exhaled. We met at a mutual friend's going-away party, both of us stranded near the drinks table when the music got too loud for conversation anywhere else. She was explaining to a plant, an actual potted plant on a windowsill, why it was positioned incorrectly for optimal light exposure. I asked if the plant seemed receptive to the feedback. She said it was hard to tell because plants had excellent poker faces. That was the beginning. 6 years of friendship looks like this. Tuesday night phone calls that started as check-ins and became something closer to the primary conversation of both our weeks. A standing Sunday morning coffee arrangement that had survived 2 apartment moves, 1 bad breakup on her end, 1 worse one on mine, a pandemic, a cross-city job change. And the time I showed up with the flu and she made me soup and put on a documentary about birds and sat on the opposite end of the couch wrapped in a blanket so she wouldn't catch it, but close enough that we were still in the same room. It looks like the kind of easy that you don't notice until someone asks you to describe your friendship and you realize you can't, because it has simply become the furniture of your life, the thing that was already there when you walked into the room. I want to be honest about something. I had noticed. I'm not going to pretend I hadn't. There were moments, scattered across those 6 years, that arrived and passed too quickly and left something behind when they went. The time we stayed up until 3 in the morning on her apartment floor arguing about whether nostalgia was a form of grief, and she said something that made me look at her and think, when did you become exactly this? And I didn't say that out loud. The time she laughed at something I said in a way that was just slightly different from her usual laugh. More private. Less performed, the kind that isn't for an audience. And I filed it away without examining it too closely because examining it too closely felt like opening a door I hadn't decided to open yet. I had noticed. I had just been very disciplined about what I did with the noticing. My sister Emily is 4 years younger than me and has had more courage in any given Tuesday than I've managed in the better part of a decade. She announced her engagement to Marcus over a family dinner with the calm confidence of someone who had already made every decision and just needed the rest of us to catch up. The wedding date was set 8 months out. I was asked to give a toast. Vera was invited because she had been to enough family dinners over the years that Emily simply considered her part of the extended roster. In the months leading up to the wedding, Vera and I talked about it the way we talked about everything, easily, thoroughly, with the kind of back and forth that makes you forget you were ever a person who didn't have this particular voice in your life. She helped me draft the toast. She told me what to wear. She vetoed the tie I was considering with the specific authority of someone who has strong opinions about textiles and isn't sorry about it. She seemed happy for Emily, genuinely, warmly happy, in the way Vera always was when something good happened to someone she cared about. I didn't notice anything different. I should have, but I didn't. The wedding was on a Saturday in September, which is the best possible month for a wedding in Ohio. When the light goes gold and the air has that particular edge of something ending that makes everything feel more precious than it actually is. The ceremony was held in an old renovated mill on the edge of town. The kind of place with exposed brick and high wooden beams and the smell of something warm and wooden that made everyone feel like they were inside a story. I sat in the second row. Vera sat beside me. She was wearing a dark green dress that I noticed in the way you notice things you're trying not to notice. And her hair was down in a way she didn't usually wear it. And she smelled like something I couldn't name and didn't try to. Emily walked in on my father's arm and the whole room shifted. The way rooms shift when something beautiful and true is happening in them. And I felt my throat tighten in the specific way that catches you off guard at weddings when you least expect to be moved. Marcus stood at the end of the aisle with the expression of a man who cannot believe his luck, which is the correct expression for the occasion, and which I found myself envying in a way I didn't entirely understand yet. The ceremony was simple and perfect. The vows were personal and specific, and twice made my mother cry in the front row. And somewhere in the middle of it, in the quiet between one vow and the next, Vera's hand found mine. I didn't move. I didn't look at her. I just held on. And she held back. We sat like that through the rest of the ceremony. Through the exchange of rings. Through the kiss that made the room erupt in warm, delighted applause. Through the recessional. I was aware of almost nothing else. The ceremony could have been happening in another country. The only thing that felt fully real was the weight of her hand in mine and the fact that neither of us had said anything about it. The reception was in the garden behind the mill, strung with lights that turned the evening into something out of a film. There were round tables with white linens and flowers that Emily had spent 3 weeks selecting. There was a band that played a mix of things old enough to be romantic and new enough to be danced to. There were toasts and food, and the particular warmth of a room full of people who all loved the same person. I gave my toast. I had practiced it 20 times and forgotten half of it the moment I stood up. Which is what always happens, and what came out instead was something more honest than what I'd written. Which Vera told me afterward was better anyway. Emily cried. Marcus shook my hand and then pulled me into a hug that went on long enough to say something without saying it. I sat back down. Vera leaned over and said quietly, "That was perfect." And I said, "You helped write half of it." And she said, "The good half." And I laughed, and she laughed, and the evening went on around us. It was later. The dinner was finished, and the dancing had started, and the lights had gone softer in the way they do when a party settles into itself. I had been talking to one of Marcus's cousins about something. I've since completely forgotten when I looked across the garden and saw that Vera wasn't at our table. I made an excuse and went to find her. She was standing near the edge of the garden, past the last row of lights, where the mill's old stone wall met the grass. Her back was to the party. Her arms were crossed over herself, not in anger, in that other way, the holding yourself together way. I walked toward her, and when I got close enough I could see from the side that she was crying. Not loudly. Not the way people cry when they want to be seen. The quiet kind. The kind you do when you think no one is watching. "Vera," she turned. She saw me. She made the expression people make when they've been caught doing something private. The quick assembling of the face. The hand moving to catch what the eyes gave away too soon. She laughed a little, the kind of laugh that isn't about anything being funny. "Sorry," she said. "I just needed some air." I walked the rest of the way to her. I stood close enough that the noise of the party behind us became something distant and irrelevant. "What happened?" "Nothing. I'm fine. It was just a beautiful ceremony." She looked away, toward the dark field beyond the wall. "You know how weddings are." "I know how you are," I said. "And this isn't just weddings." She was quiet for a long moment. The music from the band drifted over the garden. Someone at the party laughed at something. The lights in the trees moved slightly in the breeze. Then she said it. Very quietly. Almost under her breath. But I was close enough to hear every word. I thought that would be us. The world went very still. I didn't speak. I wasn't sure I could. I looked at her profile, the side of her face. The way she was staring at the dark field like she wished she could walk out into it and leave the sentence behind her. Vera, I said. My voice came out lower than I intended. Don't. She shook her head once. I know, it was a stupid thing to say. I don't even know why I said it. I do. She turned to look at me. Her eyes were still bright from crying, and in the distant glow of the string lights she looked like someone I had known for 6 years and was somehow only now fully seeing. What does that mean? She asked. I took a breath. 6 years of careful. 6 years of noticing and filing away and choosing the simpler version of every feeling because the simpler version was safer and I had built a life around safe. 6 years of the furniture of someone else's presence becoming so essential that I had stopped being able to see the shape of my life without it. 6 years of Tuesday calls and Sunday coffee and her hand in mine for an entire wedding ceremony that I had been present for only in the most technical sense. I said, it means I thought the same thing. She stared at me. During the ceremony I said, when Marcus looked at Emily, I thought I want that. I want to be the person standing at the end of the aisle who can't believe their luck. And then I thought, the only person I would want to walk toward me is standing right next to me. And I didn't say it because I have spent 6 years being very careful not to say it. Vera didn't move. The party continued behind us, indifferent and warm. The band started something slow. Why? She asked. Her voice was very quiet. Because I was afraid of what it would cost if I was wrong. And if you were right? I looked at her. I was more afraid of that. She let out a breath that was almost a laugh. She looked down at her hands. Owen, you complete idiot. I know. 6 years. I know. I have been... She stopped. Pressed her lips together. Started again. I have been waiting for you to say something for so long that I convinced myself there was nothing to say. I told myself I had imagined it. I told myself we were just friends and I was the kind of person who mistook comfort for something more and I should just be grateful for what we had. We should both be grateful for what we had, I said. It was real. It still is, she looked up at me. But I don't want to spend another 6 years sitting next to you and holding your hand and noticing everything and never saying what I actually mean. Her eyes filled again. She blinked it back. That's a terrible toast. I gave my good material earlier. She laughed. A real one this time, broken at the edges, still wet, but real. And then she looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen on her face before. Or maybe I had seen it and just hadn't let myself understand what it was until now. I said, can I say something without you telling me I should have said it sooner? Probably not, but go ahead. I love you. I think I have for a long time. And I don't know what we do with that now, but I wanted to stop not saying it. Vera looked at me for a long moment. The music from the band drifted over the garden wall, something with a melody that asked to be danced to. The lights in the trees held steady. She said, you're still afraid. Yes, so am I know. But I'm more afraid, she said, of watching someone else's wedding and thinking about you again. I reached out and she met me halfway, which is the only way it should ever work. I pulled her in and she let me and we stood there at the edge of the garden in the dark. Beyond the string lights with the party carrying on without us, and I thought, this is the moment I will come back to for the rest of my life when I need to remember what it feels like to stop waiting. We stayed like that for a while. Long enough that someone from the party eventually called my name and we had to go back. Long enough that when we did return, my mother took one look at us and smiled in the way that mothers smile when they understand something their children have taken years to arrive at. Emily found me later in the evening, when the dancing was in full force and the night had gone golden and loose. She linked her arm through mine and pulled me toward the edge of the dance floor and said, without preamble, the way Emily always did everything, finally. Was it that obvious? Owen, I invited her to my wedding, specifically hoping this would happen. I told Marcus it might. I looked at her. You could have said something. So could you, she said. For about 6 years. She kissed my cheek and went back to her husband. The rest of the evening was different. Not dramatically. The food was the same, the band was the same, the lights were the same. But Vera sat beside me and sometimes our hands found each other on the table and neither of us made anything of it and both of us made everything of it, which is maybe the best version of how these things should go. When the slow song came, we danced, and I am not a good dancer, and she is only slightly better, and we did not care. I want to tell you the rest of it went smoothly. It didn't, entirely. Two people who have spent 6 years being careful don't stop being careful overnight. There were conversations that were harder than expected, moments where the old habits reasserted themselves, evenings where one of us retreated before the other could reach. There was a week in November where I misread something she said and pulled back in the old way, and she called me on a Tuesday and said, "You're doing the thing where you disappear when you get scared." And I said, "I know," and she said, "Stop it." And I said, "I'm trying." And she said, "Try faster," which made me laugh. And things were better after that. There was a night when she told me, fully, the whole version of what those 6 years had looked like from her side. All the moments I hadn't known about. All the times she'd almost said something and then chosen the safer sentence. All the quiet private hoping that she'd convinced herself was imagining things. I listened to all of it and thought about what it cost to carry something like that alone for that long. And I told her I was sorry I had made her carry it, and she said it wasn't my fault. It was both of us, and I said, "I know, but I'm still sorry." And she accepted that in the way she accepted most things, which was honestly and without excess. There was a morning months after the wedding, when I woke up in her apartment, which was becoming a more frequent situation, and she was already awake, sitting at her kitchen table with coffee and a plant she was sketching design notes about. And the light was coming through her window in that particular way it did in the morning. And I stood in the doorway for a moment just looking at her without her knowing I was there. And I thought, this is the life I was afraid to have. And I couldn't understand why I had been afraid of it. She looked up and saw me. "You're staring." "Yes." "Why?" I thought about how to say it. I thought about all the things I hadn't said for 6 years and all the things I've been saying since September and how different the weight of them was. I thought about a garden at the edge of a wedding and a hand found during a ceremony, and 4 words spoken into the dark that changed the entire shape of what came after. "Because I spent 6 years looking at you sideways," I said, "and I'm trying to make up for it." She held my gaze for a moment. Then she went back to her sketch. "Coffee's on," she said. "Stop being sentimental and come sit down." I came and sat down. She moved her papers to make room. We drank coffee in the morning light without needing to fill the silence with anything, which is the specific luxury of two people who have 6 years of conversation already behind them, and have finally decided to use them for the right things. I think about that wedding sometimes. About the ceremony and the hand and the edge of the garden. About the moment she said it. I thought that would be us and all the courage it took to say something that true out loud, in the dark not knowing what I would say back. I think about how close we came to not saying anything, to going back to the table and finishing our dinners and driving home separately and never naming the thing that had been sitting between us for the better part of 6 years. I think about how easy it would have been and how much it would have cost. I have a student who asked me once, in that way. Students sometimes ask things that are supposed to be about history but are actually about something else, whether it was possible to wait too long. We were talking about a political decision in 1930s Europe that might have changed everything if it had been made differently, earlier, before the window closed. But I knew what he was actually asking. I thought about it for a moment. I said, sometimes waiting too long means the moment is gone. But sometimes it just means the moment arrives harder and brighter, and with more weight because of everything it had to survive to get there. He seemed to accept that. I meant it. The thing I know now, that I didn't know 6 years ago when we met near a drinks table while she lectured a houseplant about light exposure, is that the people who matter don't become the furniture of your life because they are ordinary. They become the furniture of your life because they are so exactly right that your life has quietly rearranged itself around them without asking your permission. The couch is there because the room makes sense with it. The conversation is there because the week makes sense with it. The hand is there because the ceremony makes sense with it. And the person is there because everything makes sense with her. I still drive the 11-year-old car. I still live in the apartment that is 1 bedroom more than I need. Though the question of that extra bedroom has been coming up in conversation, more frequently lately in ways that are not exactly subtle. I still teach history to teenagers who are mostly interested in other things and occasionally, briefly, interested in the right ones. My life, by most external measures, looks much the same as it did before a September wedding changed the axis of it. But Vera sits across from me at the kitchen table in the mornings with a coffee and a sketch, and the light coming through the window. And on Tuesday nights, the calls are the same calls they always were, except now they happen from the same room. And when something good happens to someone we love, she reaches for my hand, and this time I know exactly what it means. And the next time someone gets married, if I'm standing at the end of an aisle and someone walks toward me, I already know the only face I'm looking for, but I want to go back one more time. Not to the wedding. Before it. To the 6 years themselves. Because I think I've been telling this story as though the before was just waiting room and the after was the real thing. And that's not right. The before was real too. It was its own complete thing, and I don't want to lose it in the telling. There was a Tuesday call in the second year of our friendship, somewhere in October, when Vera had just ended a relationship she had been in for 14 months. She didn't cry on the phone. She just talked, clearly and at length, about all the ways it had made sense and all the ways it hadn't, and at some point she said, "The worst part is I think I knew it wasn't right from about the 3rd month, and I just kept hoping I was wrong about knowing." I said, "What made you keep hoping?" And she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Because being right about that kind of thing is worse than being wrong." I thought about that sentence for days afterward. I think it's one of the truest things anyone has ever said to me about the particular courage it takes to love someone, when you know love doesn't come with guarantees. There was a Sunday morning in the 4th year when she came to coffee with plans she'd been working on for a park. Commission she'd just won, her biggest project at that point. A 3-acre redesign of a neglected green space in the center of the city. She spread the drawings across the table between our coffee cups and explained what she was trying to do, which was to create a space that felt both public and private, open and sheltered. The kind of place where a person could be surrounded by other people and still feel briefly alone. I looked at the drawings and then I looked at her and I thought, this is exactly who you are, and I was so glad she existed in the world. And I did not say any of the other things I was thinking. There was an evening in the 5th year when we walked home from a film we'd seen together. She hated it, I loved it. We argued about it for 4 blocks with the cheerful ferocity of 2 people who have been disagreeing productively for long enough to know it won't cost them anything. And we stopped outside her building, and there was a moment, one of those suspended moments, where neither of us moved to say goodnight, and neither of us moved to go in, and the street was quiet around us, and if I had been braver, or less afraid, or more honest, something might have happened. Instead I said, "Same time next Sunday?" And she said, "Bring better opinions," and I went home and lay on my couch. Though it felt like the ceiling, and thought about what I hadn't done for most of the night. There was the flu Sunday. I mentioned it already, but I want to stay with it for a moment because I think it says something important. I arrived at her apartment feeling genuinely terrible, the kind of sick that makes you feel like a child in the specific way that you want someone to tell you it will be okay and bring you something warm. Vera opened the door, assessed the situation immediately, said absolutely not when I suggested I should go home. Made soup from actual ingredients rather than a can, brought blankets, put on the bird documentary, and sat at the far end of the couch with her feet tucked under her and her own cup of tea and just stayed. She didn't fuss. She didn't make it about taking care of me in any performative way. She just stayed in the same room at the right distance for the entire afternoon and into the evening. I fell asleep somewhere around the 3rd hour of the documentary. When I woke up, she was still there, asleep herself, her head tilted against the back of the couch. I sat in the dark and looked at her for a long moment and thought something I don't have a clean sentence for. Something in the category of this person is essential. And I let myself feel it just long enough before I went back to sleep. These are the things that made up the 6 years. Not the moments I almost said something. The ordinary ones. The Tuesday calls and the Sunday coffees and the arguments about films and the soup and the drawings spread across a table. The ordinary ones are what I mean when I say the before was real. It was a life, full and complete and genuinely good, and I don't want to talk about it as though it was only ever a prologue to something else. But it was also a life with an absence in it. A specific shape of absence, the outline of something that wasn't being said, that I had learned to navigate around so thoroughly that I sometimes forgot it was there. And that's the thing about absences you've lived with long enough, they become part of the furniture too, and you stop noticing the space they take up until something happens to fill them. What happened was a September wedding and a dark garden and 4 words spoken quietly into the night by a woman in a dark green dress who had been carrying them for longer than I knew. After the wedding, when we had driven home separately and I was lying in my apartment in the specific sleepless, Alertness of someone whose life has just changed. I thought about all the ordinary Tuesdays and Sundays and street corners and soup afternoons and sketches spread on tables. I thought about the flu Sunday. I thought about the moment outside her building in the 5th year when I said same time next Sunday instead of what I was actually thinking. I thought about all of it as a continuous thread, one thing leading to another. Each ordinary moment building the foundation for a garden at the edge of a wedding where something finally gave way. I sent her a message at 1 in the morning. I wrote, "I've been lying here thinking about the flu Sunday." She replied 8 minutes later, which meant she was also awake. "What about it?" I wrote, "I think that was when I knew." There was a longer pause this time. Then, "I think that was when I knew too." Then, "Go to sleep, Owen," I wrote. "Can't." She wrote, "I know." "Me neither." And then, "Sunday coffee?" I wrote, "Saturday, actually." She wrote, "That's not how it works." I wrote, "It is now." She sent back something that was not a word, just a small punctuation of warmth that I have looked at more times than I will admit. Saturday coffee happened. And Sunday. And the Tuesday call happened from her kitchen that week because I was already there. And the weeks after that arranged themselves into a new shape, different from the old one but continuous with it. The way a story's second chapter is different from the first, but made of the same material. She came to the park project opening 6 months after the wedding. The 3-acre redesign she had shown me in drawings on a coffee table, now real and planted and full of the particular quiet that good design creates without announcing itself. We walked through it on a cold March afternoon, her explaining what she'd intended with each section. Me asking questions that were partly genuine curiosity and partly just wanting to hear her talk about the things she loved. There was a section near the center with a wooden bench under an oak tree that she'd positioned to catch afternoon light from the west. She said, "This is my favorite part. It's designed so you can see people around you but feel like you're alone. Surrounded but private." I thought about what she'd said 4 years earlier when she first described what she was trying to create. "You said that's what you wanted to make," I said. "A place where you can be surrounded by people and still feel briefly alone." She looked at me. "You remembered that. You said it on a Sunday morning with your drawings all over my coffee cups." She was quiet for a moment. "You never said you remembered things like that." "I remembered everything," I said. "I was just careful about what I did with it." She took my hand on the bench under the oak tree in the pale March afternoon. We sat there for a while. People moved around the park, the public part of the public space, while we sat in the private part of it, which is what she had built it to allow. I thought about a woman explaining to a potted plant about light exposure. I thought about poker-faced plants and correct opinions and soup made from actual ingredients and the specific shape of a 6-year friendship that had been, all along, the longest possible way toward this bench. "Owen," she said after a while. "Yeah, I thought that would be us." I looked at her. She was smiling. She meant the bench. She meant the life. She meant all of it. "It is," I said. And the light came through the oak tree at exactly the angle she had designed it to. And we stayed until it shifted. I think about the word finally a lot. Emily said it the night of her wedding, the way she always did everything, without ceremony and without apology. Finally, like something overdue had arrived at the door. Like a letter the postal system had held onto for 6 years and just now delivered. I used to hear that word and feel the sting of it. All the time I'd let pass. All the Tuesdays I'd hung up the phone and sat alone in my apartment with the specific dissatisfaction of someone who has said everything except the most important thing. All the Sunday mornings I'd walked home after coffee feeling both full and somehow short of something I couldn't name. All the street corners and film arguments and soup afternoons where the real conversation was happening just underneath the one we were actually having, like a river you can hear below the floor. But now when I hear the word, I feel something different. Not the sting of the time that passed. Something closer to gratitude for it. Because those 6 years weren't wasted. They were the years in which I learned every shape of her, how she thinks, how she argues, how she laughs when something is genuinely funny, versus when something is only politely funny. How she carries difficulty, how she talks to plants about light. How she makes soup from real ingredients without being asked. How she can sit in the same room as you in silence and make the silence feel like company rather than absence. I knew her completely before I ever told her I loved her, which meant that when I told her I loved her, I knew exactly what I was saying. That's not nothing. That might be everything. She would tell you I'm being sentimental. She would say it in the fond, slightly exasperated tone she uses when I say something she finds excessive and true in equal measure. She would say, Owen, honestly. And then she would look at me with that expression that is the private version of her face. The one she doesn't manage or arrange. And whatever she said with her voice would be contradicted completely by what her eyes were doing, which is something I notice every time and never plan to stop noticing. That is where we are. That is what the 6 years and 1 wedding and 1 sentence whispered into a dark garden built. Not a perfect story. Not a clean one. A real one, which is the only kind worth telling. And somewhere in this city, in a park with a bench under an oak tree positioned to catch afternoon light from the west, there is a space that was designed to make you feel surrounded and private at the same time. Held and free. Together and briefly, beautifully alone. She built it before she knew she was building it for both of us. But she knew. I think on some level, she always knew. The plant had an excellent poker face. But she never did. Not really. Not when it mattered. Not with me.